The Man Who Reshaped the World, The Life of Charles Darwin. Part 1. Origins of a Quiet Revolutionary. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Questioning Mind. On a cold winter morning of the 12th of February, 1809, in the quiet market town of Shrewsbury, England, a boy was born into privilege but destined for controversy. His name was Charles Robert Darwin. Born into a wealthy and respected family, Charles's early life did not betray any signs that he would one day shake the very foundation of science, philosophy, and religion. Charles's father, Robert Darwin, was a successful physician and financier, a towering man both physically and intellectually. His mother, Susanna Wedgwood, came from the famous Wedgwood pottery family. The young Charles grew up in a household filled with ideas, affluence, and a growing expectation that he would one day take his place among the British elite. Yet Charles, the fifth of 6 children, was not a boy drawn to the strictures of conventional education or social status. He was quiet, observant, and deeply curious. From a young age, Charles exhibited a fascination with nature. He collected beetles, cataloged plants, and spent more time outdoors than with textbooks. While his older brother Erasmus excelled in academics, Charles was more interested in what crawled, flew, and bloomed outside their grand family estate. When Charles was just 8 years old, tragedy struck. His mother died of illness, and the emotional hole left behind would remain with him for life. Charles became more introspective, often seeking solace in the woods or on long walks by the River Severn. His relationship with his father grew closer, but Robert Darwin grew concerned about his son's future. Charles, he feared, lacked direction. In 1825, at the age of 16, Darwin was sent to the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. His father hoped Charles would follow in his footsteps and become a doctor. But young Darwin found the lectures boring, the surgical procedures horrific, and the human anatomy classes intolerable. He recoiled at the sight of blood and fainted during surgeries. Worse still, he was uninspired by the rigid medical curriculum. Instead, Darwin found companionship with a group of radical thinkers, naturalists, and dissenters at the university. He joined the Plinian Society, where students debated controversial scientific ideas, some of which outright contradicted the biblical view of creation. There, Darwin learned about the transformation of species, the geological age of the earth, and the possibility that nature was far more dynamic than church doctrine allowed. This was his first exposure to the idea that species might not be fixed, and though he didn't yet know it, the seed of evolution was being planted. Chapter 2. Cambridge and a Change of Course. Seeing that Charles had no interest in medicine, Robert Darwin suggested he become a clergymana, respectable and stable profession for a man of his class. Charles agreed, perhaps half-heartedly, and enrolled at Christ's College, Cambridge, in 1828 to study theology. But here, too, Darwin found himself more engaged by the natural world than by divinity. He became friends with several influential figures who would shape his future. Among them was the Reverend John Stevens Henslow, a botanist who took Charles under his wing. Henslow recognized Darwin's passion and intellect and invited him on nature walks, where they discussed geology, botany, and the emerging ideas about Earth's history. It was during these excursions that Darwin began to think more systematically about the natural world. He started to see nature not as a static creation, but as a dynamic process. He devoured the writings of Alexander von Humboldt and Charles Lyell, particularly Lyell's Principles of Geology, which argued that geological processes observed in the present could explain the past. The Earth, Lyell insisted, was not a few thousand years old, as the Bible claimed, but millions of years old. In 1831, Charles graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree. While he had done well enough, his mind was increasingly drawn to adventure and exploration. Fortunately, fate would intervene in the form of a letter that would alter the course of his life and the history of science. Chapter 3. The Voyage That Changed Everything. In the summer of 1831, Henslow received a letter from Captain Robert Fitzroy of the HMS Beagle, a ship preparing for a 5-year voyage to map the coast of South America. Fitzroy was looking for a gentleman naturalist to join the expedition, not as a paid scientist, but as a companion and collector. Henslow recommended his star pupil, Charles Darwin. Initially, Robert Darwin opposed the idea, but after some persuasion, he relented. At age 22, Charles Darwin boarded the HMS Beagle on the 27th of December, 1831, bound for the farthest corners of the world. The voyage would last 5 years and take Darwin to the coasts of Brazil, Argentina, Tierra del Fuego, the Andes, Chile, Australia, and most famously, the Galapagos Islands. Throughout the journey, Darwin collected fossils, documented wildlife, and took extensive notes on the geology and biology of every region. He was particularly struck by the similarities and variations between species in different environments. Why did finches on different Galapagos Islands have different beak shapes? Why did giant tortoises vary from one island to another? Why were there fossils of extinct animals that closely resembled living species? Darwin began to ask questions that would become central to his life's work. Could species change over time? If so, how? What mechanism drove this transformation? He did not yet have the answers, but the evidence was piling up. His notebooks brimmed with observations, sketches, and hypotheses. As the Beagle made its slow way around the globe, Darwin's mind was working faster than ever before. By the time the Beagle returned to England in October 1836, Charles Darwin was no longer an amateur naturalist. He was a man with a revolutionary idea forming in his head, an idea that would take decades to refine, articulate, and defend. Part 2. The Making of a Theory. Chapter Fear. A Quiet Return, a Storm Inside. When Charles Darwin stepped off the HMS Beagle in 1836, he was no longer the carefree student who had boarded it 5 years earlier. His mind was overflowing with questions, contradictions, and one haunting possibility that life was not fixed but changing, and that species, including humans, might have evolved through a natural rather than divine process. Yet Darwin did not rush to publish his thoughts. Instead, he returned to a quiet but busy life in London, living with his brother Erasmus. He began sorting through the vast collection of specimens, fossils, plants, birds, and insects that he had gathered from across the globe. He corresponded with experts, consulted leading geologists and taxonomists, and began shaping his theory piece by piece. Behind closed doors, Darwin wrestled with the implications of what he had seen. The variation among species, especially on the Galapagos Islands, seemed to support a slow, natural transformation over time. He was particularly intrigued by Thomas Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population, 1798, which argued that populations grow faster than food supplies, leading to a struggle for survival. From this, Darwin drew a groundbreaking conclusion. In nature, individuals best suited to their environment would survive and reproduce. This was the mechanism he had been seeking. He called it natural selection. But Darwin knew that this idea would be explosive. It directly contradicted the biblical account of creation. It challenged the prevailing view that species were immutable. It implied that humans, too, were part of this evolutionary process. And so, he hesitated. For nearly 2 decades, Darwin kept his theory largely to himself, fearing backlash from the church, the scientific establishment, and society at large. He worked quietly, methodically, collecting more data, breeding pigeons to test inheritance, and growing a mountain of evidence. Chapter 5. Marriage and Life at Down House. In 1839, Charles Darwin married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood, a deeply religious and intelligent woman who would become his lifelong confidant. Their marriage was a union of affection, intellect, and tension, especially over Charles's increasingly heretical scientific ideas. That same year, Charles and Emma moved to Down House in Kent, a quiet country home surrounded by gardens, orchards, and woods. It was here, away from the public eye, that Darwin would do his most important thinking. He walked daily along a path he called the Sandwalk, pondering the origin of life, the structure of nature, and the fate of his ideas. Darwin's health, never strong, continued to decline. He suffered from chronic illness, nausea, headaches, fatigue that would plague him for the rest of his life. Some believe it was stress. Others suspect it was a tropical disease contracted during the voyage. Whatever the cause, Darwin spent much of his time bedridden, working from his study at Down House, corresponding with scientists, and quietly building his case for evolution. He also became a devoted father. Charles and Emma had 10 children, though 3 died young. Despite his illness, Darwin was a playful and attentive parent. He played games with his children, encouraged their curiosity, and took joy in their company. Family life at Down House was intimate and lively, a refuge from the storm he knew would one day come. Chapter 6. The Letter That Forced His Hand. By the early 1850s, Darwin had amassed a mountain of data supporting his theory of evolution by natural selection. He had begun drafting a massive, multi-volume treatise on the subject, tentatively titled Natural Selection. He worked slowly, carefully, hoping to build an unassailable case. But then in June 1858, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from Alfred Russel Wallace, a young naturalist working in the Malay archipelago. Wallace had independently arrived at a theory almost identical to Darwin's sand. He wanted Darwin's opinion. Darwin was stunned. He had waited too long, and now someone else had reached the same revolutionary idea. In a state of shock and honor, Darwin showed Wallace's manuscript to his colleagues Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker. After some discussion, they proposed a joint presentation of both men's ideas to the Linnean Society in London on the 1st of July, 1858. Neither Wallace nor Darwin attended. The former was still abroad, and the latter was grieving the death of his infant son. The presentation caused little stir at the time, but it prompted Darwin to accelerate his work. Over the next year, he condensed his massive treatise into a single volumia, clear, powerful book that would rock the world. Chapter 7. On the Origin of Species. On the 24th of November, 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, a book that would forever alter the landscape of science, religion, and human self-understanding. In it, Darwin laid out his argument with remarkable clarity and modesty. He presented an overwhelming array of evidence, from pigeon breeding to geology, from fossils to island fauna. He avoided direct discussion of human evolution, knowing it would provoke controversy, but hinted that light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some praised the book as a masterpiece of scientific reasoning. Others denounced it as heresy. The Anglican Church bristled at the idea that life was not divinely fixed. Scientists debated fiercely. Newspapers ran satirical cartoons of Darwin as an ape. One of the most famous public debates occurred in 1860 at Oxford University, where Bishop Samuel Wilberforce challenged Darwin's ideas, and Thomas Huxley, Darwin's ally, famously defended them, declaring he would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who used his gifts to obscure the truth. Despite the uproar, the book was a success. It sold out its first edition within days. It was translated into multiple languages. Within a decade, evolution by natural selection was being taught and debated around the world. Darwin had ignited a revolution not with violence, but with evidence and reason. Part 3. Storms, Struggles, and the Descent of Man. Chapter 8. The Backlash and the Brotherhood. Following the publication of On the Origin of Species, Charles Darwin found himself at the center of one of the most heated controversies in scientific history. The storm he had anticipated for 2 decades had finally arrived. The divide between science and religion, long simmering, was now public, passionate, and painful. While some scientists were quick to embrace Darwin's ideas, many religious leaders denounced them as blasphemous. The notion that life evolved through natural processes without divine intervention was an affront to traditional Christian doctrine. Darwin was called an atheist, a destroyer of faith, a madman. Caricatures depicted him with the body of a monkey, mocking the idea of human evolution. Yet amid the chaos, a small circle of allies rose to defend him. Among the most prominent was Thomas Huxley, a biologist and gifted speaker who would earn the nickname Darwin's Bulldog for his fierce advocacy. Huxley debated bishops, published articles, and rallied support in academic circles. Others, like Joseph Dalton Hooker and Charles Lyell, also lent their voices in defense of Darwinian evolution. Darwin himself remained largely silent in public. He was not a fighter, not a man of public debates. His health was fragile, his temperament gentle. He chose instead to let his data and his books speak for him. At Down House, he worked tirelessly on follow-up volumes and maintained a massive correspondence with scientists across Europe and America. One of Darwin's greatest strengths was his humility. He admitted when he was uncertain, acknowledged alternative explanations, and remained open to criticism. This intellectual honesty earned him respect, even from some who disagreed with his conclusions. The 1860s were a time of both triumph and turmoil for Darwin. His scientific reputation grew even as the social backlash persisted. Evolution became a hotly debated topic, not only in universities, but in churches, salons, and dinner tables. But Darwin was not done yet. Chapter 9. Human Origins and the Descent of Man. Darwin had been careful to avoid direct discussion of human evolution and origin, but by the late 1860s, he knew the time had come. The question everyone was asking, whether aloud or in whispers, was clear. What does evolution mean for humanity? In 1871, Darwin published his second most famous work, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. This time, he tackled the issue head-on. Darwin argued that humans, like all other species, evolved from earlier life forms. Drawing from anatomy, embryology, and fossil records, he suggested that the human race shared a common ancestor with other primates. The implications were enormous. No longer could humanity claim a unique, divinely created status. We were part of the animal kingdom, subject to the same natural laws. But Darwin went further. In Descent, he introduced the concept of sexual selection, the idea that certain traits evolve not because they help an organism survive, but because they improve reproductive success. Peacock's tails, deer antlers, and human courtship behaviors all made sense through this lens. The book, as expected, caused another wave of uproar. Religious leaders condemned it. Some scientists were cautious. But many readers, especially younger scholars, were captivated by the breadth and boldness of Darwin's vision. And again, Darwin stayed home, letting the world debate, while he tended to his garden, wrote letters, and quietly revolutionized our understanding of ourselves. Chapter 10. A Legacy Written in Ink and Earth. In the final decade of his life, Darwin continued to work with extraordinary discipline. Though often sick, he rose early, took long walks on the sandwalk, and wrote with tireless focus. He published several more books on orchids, climbing plants, and the movement of earthworms. Each book, while narrower in scope, reinforced the central idea that nature operated through small, observable changes, not miraculous leaps. He turned his garden into a laboratory, conducting experiments on pollination, root growth, and insect behavior. Even earthworms, he showed, played a crucial role in shaping the soil and landscape. Darwin became a quiet symbol of scientific inquiry, a man who let no illness, no insult, and no doctrine prevent him from pursuing the truth. In private, he remained a devoted husband and father. Emma, despite her religious beliefs, stood by him faithfully. They shared a deep bond of love, though they often discussed their philosophical differences with care and tenderness. Darwin, for all his radical ideas, never mocked belief. He simply believed that the grandeur of life lay in its processes, not its myths. Chapter 11. The final chapter. Charles Darwin died peacefully at Down House on the 19th of April, 1882, at the age of 73. His passing was mourned across the world. Scientists, theologians, students, and statesmen recognized that a great mind had been lost. Despite the controversy he had stirred in life, Darwin was honored in death. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, near Sir Isaac Newton, symbolic moment for the triumph of science and the peaceful coexistence of discovery and reverence. His funeral was attended by the most prominent intellectuals of the age. It was not just a farewell to a man, but a tribute to a revolution in thought. In the decades to follow, his name would become synonymous with bold inquiry and transformative ideas. Chapter 12. Afterlife of a Theory. Today, Darwin's legacy is everywhere. His name is etched into university halls, textbooks, and history books. Evolution is the cornerstone of modern biology, the unifying framework for understanding life from bacteria to whales, from DNA to ecosystems. Genetics, unknown in Darwin's day, later confirmed and expanded his ideas. The discovery of DNA, the mapping of genomes, and the study of hereditary traits all validated his central thesis that variation, inheritance, and selection drive the diversity of life. But Darwin's influence goes beyond science. His work changed how we see ourselves. No longer the center of the universe or the special creation of a deity, humanity became part of a vast, interconnected web of life. This humbling insight opened doors to environmentalism, ethics, psychology, and philosophy. His story is not just that of a theory, but of a man patient, honest, curious, who dared to follow the evidence wherever it led. Darwin didn't set out to change the world, but by observing finches and fossils, by asking questions others feared to ask, and by quietly pursuing the truth, he did. He remains a reminder that revolutions don't always begin with fire or speeches. Sometimes they begin with a question, a notebook, and a long walk in the garden. Part 4. The World After Darwin. The Evolution of a Legacy. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Scientific World. In the years following Charles Darwin's death in 1882, the world of science entered a new phase. The seed he had planted, evolution by natural selection, had taken root, but now it had to grow. While many biologists embraced Darwin's ideas, not all accepted natural selection as the primary driver of evolution. Some questioned the lack of a known mechanism for heredity. Others misinterpreted Darwin's theory, twisting it for ideological or political ends. But science moves slowly and steadily. In the early 20th century, Darwin's ideas were resurrected and solidified through what became known as the modern synthesis. This new framework, emerging between the 1930s and 1950s, integrated Darwin's theory of evolution with Gregor Mendel's laws of heredity, laws Darwin himself had never known. Geneticists like Ronald Fisher, J.B.S. Haldane, and Sewell Wright showed mathematically how small genetic changes could lead to major evolutionary shifts over time. Natural selection, they demonstrated, could indeed account for both micro and macro evolutionary patterns. What Darwin had proposed without knowing the inner workings of genes was now supported by hard evidence. Chapter 14. The Twisting of Darwin's Ideas. While Darwin's scientific legacy grew, so too did the misuse of his theories. Some thinkers took evolution and distorted it into tools of oppression. The worst of these distortions came in the form of social Darwinism, a movement that falsely applied survival of the fittest to human societies. Figures like Herbert Spencer and others claimed that the poor, the weak, and the colonized were naturally inferior. Governments used these ideas to justify colonialism, racism, and even eugenics. Though Darwin himself abhorred slavery and supported abolition, his name was invoked in causes he never supported. These abuses culminated in the early 20th century with horrific policies, forced sterilizations, immigration restrictions, and, most infamously, the ideology behind Nazi Germany's racial theories. The phrase Darwinism was tarnished in the public mind. It would take generations of scientists and historians to reclaim Darwin's ideas from these grotesque distortions. Darwin had never claimed that one race was superior to another. He had only argued that all life shared a common ancestry and evolved through natural processes. Chapter 15. The Rise of Evolutionary Biology. By the 1950s and 60s, Darwin's theory stood on firmer ground than ever before. The discovery of DNA by James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953 gave biology a molecular foundation that Darwin could never have imagined. The double helix of DNA confirmed that traits were inherited through a chemical code. Mutations in this code introduced variation, and natural selection, acting on this variation, shaped species over time just as Darwin had predicted. Evolutionary biology emerged as a unified field, blending paleontology, genetics, ecology, and behavior. The fossil record, once seen as incomplete, now revealed rich details of transitional form. Comparative anatomy and embryology supported common descent. Biogeography, especially the study of island species, continued to reinforce Darwin's ideas. Darwin's theory, once radical, became a bedrock of modern science. Chapter 16. In the Public Imagination. Even as evolution became accepted in academia, the public response remained mixed, especially in religious communities. In 1925, the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee put evolution on trial in the American South. A high school teacher, John Scopes, was prosecuted for teaching evolution in defiance of state law. The trial became a national spectacle. Though Scopes was found guilty, the trial exposed deep divisions between science and religion. Debates over evolution continued into the 21st century. In the U.S. and other countries, creationist movements pushed back, advocating for the inclusion of intelligent design in schools. These movements often invoked religious beliefs over scientific consensus. Yet Darwin's influence endured. In schools, museums, and media, his name became synonymous with science itself. Documentaries, biographies, and films brought his story to new generations. Portraits of Darwin appeared in classrooms, and The Origin of Species remained one of the most cited books in the history of science. Even those who opposed evolution could not ignore Darwin. He had become part of the cultural DNA. Chapter 17. Darwin Today, More Relevant Than Ever. In the 21st century, Charles Darwin's work is not just relevant, it is essential. As humanity faces global challenges, climate change, pandemics, extinction, crises, understanding evolution is more critical than ever. Medical science relies on evolution to understand antibiotic resistance, viral mutations, and vaccine development. Conservation biology uses evolutionary principles to preserve genetic diversity and prevent species collapse. Agriculture applies evolutionary models to breed resilient crops and manage pests. Evolution also plays a role in artificial intelligence, psychology, and even economics, where competition, adaptation, and selection shape complex systems. Darwin's legacy has grown beyond biology. It has become a way of thinking and approach to solving problems, understanding change, and seeing connections where none seem to exist. Chapter 18. The Human Connection. One of Darwin's most profound insights, often overlooked, is not that humans evolved from primates, but that we are not separate from nature. Darwin didn't diminish humanity. He placed us within the grand story of life. We are cousins to whales, to butterflies, to moss and mold. We are not the masters of nature, but part of its endless experiment. This worldview challenges human arrogance, but also offers profound beauty and humility. To see ourselves as evolved creatures born from stardust, shaped by time, bonded to every living thing, is not to deny wonder. It is to find it everywhere. Part 5. Inside Darwin's Mind. Letters, Journals, and Personal Struggles. Chapter 19. The Letter Writer. Though Charles Darwin shied away from public debate, he was never isolated. His true battlefield was the written word, and he wielded it with precision. Over the course of his life, Darwin wrote and received over 14,000 letters, creating one of the most extraordinary scientific correspondences in history. Through these letters, Darwin conducted experiments, tested ideas, debated colleagues, and refined theories. He communicated regularly with scientists across Europe and America, from botanists to geologists, zoologists to theologians. His letters were not only exchanges of data, but also windows into his personality: polite, cautious, curious, and deeply thoughtful. Darwin's relationships through correspondence helped him stay connected to the scientific world, especially as illness confined him to Down House. One of his most important correspondents was Asa Gray, a Harvard botanist and devout Christian. Their discussions about evolution and theology revealed Darwin's sensitivity and restraint. Though Darwin was not a believer himself, he respected Gray's faith and never dismissed religious views outright. Through these exchanges, we see Darwin as more than a scientist. We see a man who wrestled with doubt, valued friendship, and believed in the power of civil dialogue even amid radical ideas. Chapter 20. The Private Diaries. Darwin's notebooks and diaries, most famously the Transmutation Notebooks, reveal the evolution of his own thinking. In these personal journals, he scribbled ideas that would later shape modern biology. One famous page, known simply as the I Think page, contains a branching, sketch-up primitive version of an evolutionary tree. Underneath it, Darwin wrote, "I think one species does change into another." This single page marks a turning point in scientific history. From vague questions about variation, Darwin had arrived at the core idea of common descent. The tree of life was not fixed, but constantly growing, splitting, adapting. His diaries also reveal how methodical he was. He noted not only observations from the Beagle voyage, but also the results of breeding experiments, pollination patterns, and insect behaviors. He even kept records of barnacle dissection for years, a tedious but necessary project to understand taxonomy and variation. Yet the notebooks also betray moments of frustration, illness, and philosophical despair. Darwin often questioned himself. Could he really challenge centuries of belief? Was he overreaching? Would his work matter? It's precisely this vulnerability that makes his achievement more human and more heroic. Chapter 21. Illness and Isolation. Darwin's physical condition was one of the most mysterious aspects of his life. For decades, he suffered from recurring nausea, vomiting, palpitations, fatigue, insomnia, and anxiety. Modern historians and doctors have proposed many diagnoses: Chagas disease from a bug bite in South America, Crohn's disease, panic disorder, or a combination of stress-related illnesses. Whatever the cause, his illness profoundly shaped his life. It kept him homebound, reduced his travel, and isolated him from public appearances. Yet, paradoxically, it also allowed him the solitude to think, write, and refine his ideas. Down House became a sanctuary. Darwin developed strict daily routine short work sessions, walks along the sandwalk, time with family. He devised tools to manage stress and avoid fatigue. His study was his world, and from that small room came the foundations of modern evolutionary biology. His wife Emma was his constant caregiver. Their marriage, though tested by philosophical differences, was tender and enduring. Emma often read to him, edited his manuscripts, and supported his quiet revolution even when she feared for his soul. Chapter 22. Personal Losses. The Darwins had 10 children, and though many thrived, tragedy struck the family repeatedly. In 1851, their beloved daughter Annie, aged 10, died of what was likely tuberculosis. Her death devastated Charles and further distanced him from religious belief. 3 other children died in infancy or early childhood, leaving behind deep emotional scars. Darwin's grief was not just private. It shaped his scientific worldview. He saw nature as both beautiful and brutal an arena of birth, struggle, and loss. His empathy for living beings, especially animals, came not from theory but from life experience. Despite the tragedies, Darwin remained a devoted father. He encouraged curiosity in his surviving children, allowed them into his study, and treated them with warmth and humor. His son Francis Darwin would later become a botanist and publish many of his father's letters and works. Chapter 23. Doubts and Beliefs. Darwin is often portrayed as a militant atheist. In truth, his religious views were more complex. Raised in a Unitarian Christian household, Darwin had once studied theology with the intent of becoming a clergyman. But over the years, his views shifted. The problem of suffering, especially the suffering of children, deeply troubled him. The natural world, with all its cruelty and indifference, seemed inconsistent with a loving God. Darwin never called himself an atheist. He preferred the term agnostic, coined by his friend Huxley. He wrote, "I have never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of a God. I think that generally an agnostic would be the most correct description of my state of mind." Darwin didn't attack religion. He simply believed that scientific truth should be based on observation and evidence, not tradition or scripture. He respected those who believed in God, especially Emma, but he could not reconcile belief with what he saw in nature. This tension between wonder and realism defined Darwin's character. He saw grandeur in life's complexity, even without divine intervention. Chapter 24. The Final Days. In his last years, Darwin continued to write. Books on orchids, worms, and plant movements flowed from his pen. Though his health worsened, his mind remained sharp. He remained curious until the end. In his final years, he took interest in topics as diverse as bee behavior, forest ecology, and the role of birds in seed dispersal. Every observation fed his belief that nature was interconnected, that nothing in biology made sense except in light of evolution. On the 19th of April, 1882, Charles Darwin died peacefully in his bed at Down House, surrounded by family. After a public appeal, he was buried in Westminster Abbey, among Britain's greatest minds, near Newton, near kings, near poets. Not because he sought glory, but because he had changed the way we see the world. Part 6. The Tree of Life. Darwin's Ideas in the 21st Century. Chapter 25. The Evolution of Evolution. Charles Darwin laid the foundation, but the house of evolutionary biology has grown taller, deeper, and more intricate since his time. What began as a bold hypothesis in 1859 has become a fully integrated, data-rich discipline in the 21st century. In Darwin's day, genes were unknown. Today, we not only understand genes, we read and rewrite them. The mapping of the human genome in 2003 confirmed our shared heritage with all life forms. Humans share 98.8% of DNA with chimpanzees, 85% with mice, 60% with fruit flies, even 40–50% with bananas. These percentages aren't mere trivia. They are the direct expression of Darwin's central idea: common descent. Life, in all its forms, is part of one grand branching family. Evolution now includes tools Darwin could never have imagined: CRISPR gene editing, computational phylogenetics, and molecular clocks that trace the divergence of species down to the decade. Darwin's Tree of Life is no longer a sketch in a notebook. It's a sprawling, data-driven tapestry being refined daily by labs across the globe. Chapter 26, Evolution in Action. Darwin once said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, but the one most responsive to change." Today, we watch evolution unfold in real time. Antibiotic resistance. Bacteria evolve to outsmart drugs, creating superbugs and driving pharmaceutical innovation. Viruses mutateas, seen with SARS-CoV-2, prompting vaccine updates and changing public health strategies. Insects adapt to pesticides, weeds outmaneuver herbicides, and animals shift behaviors due to urban environments. These are not slow, invisible processes. They are fast, observable, and often dangerous. Evolution is not just a historical fact, it is a present force shaping our lives. Darwin showed us that change was constant. Now, in the Anthropocene, the age of humans, we must understand evolution not only to grasp our past, but to safeguard our future. Chapter 27, In the Classroom and Culture. Darwin's legacy is also educational. Across the world, evolution is a cornerstone of biology curricula. Students learn not only the history of life, but how to think scientifically, to gather evidence, test hypotheses, and refine conclusions. Yet teaching evolution remains controversial in some regions. In certain schools, it is taught with disclaimers or omitted altogether. In others, it is paired with religious alternatives like creationism or intelligent design despite lacking scientific basis. This tension reflects the ongoing cultural challenge Darwin presents. His work doesn't just explain biology, it reframes human identity. We are not separate from nature. We are not the final goal of creation. We are products of time, chance, and necessity. For some, that's unsettling. For others, it's empowering. Evolution tells us that we are connected to one another, to the environment, to every creature that ever lived. Chapter 28, Darwin in Art, Film, and Fiction. Darwin's reach extends far beyond science. His story has inspired novelists, filmmakers, poets, and painters. In literature, authors from George Eliot to Ian McEwan have wrestled with the philosophical weight of evolution. In film, Darwin's life has been dramatized in works like Creation, 2009, which explores his struggle with faith, family, and the death of his daughter Annie. In visual arts, evolution has inspired both realism and surrealism depictions of primates evolving into humans, spirals of DNA, and abstract expressions of transformation. Even music has echoed Darwinian themes, from concept albums on natural history to orchestral pieces evoking the long arc of time. Darwin has become a cultural archetype, the thinker, the challenger, the quiet revolutionary. His beard, his furrowed brow, his gaze into the unknown, they symbolize a mind unafraid to follow evidence wherever it leads. Chapter 29, Ethics, Environment, and Evolution. Darwin's ideas have also informed ethical debates. Understanding evolution helps clarify animal rights. If animals are our evolutionary cousins, what do we owe them in terms of compassion and treatment? Genetic engineering. How far should we go in altering life? Conservation. Can evolutionary knowledge help us preserve biodiversity? Indeed, Conservation biology often relies on evolutionary insights, preserving genetic variation, protecting keystone species, and maintaining ecological balance all stem from Darwinian thinking. In climate science, evolution helps us predict which species might adapt or perishes. Temperatures rise and habitats shift. Darwin's theory is not just explanatory, it's applicative. It shapes our responsibilities in a rapidly changing world. Chapter 30. The Global Darwin. Though Darwin was British, his impact is truly global. In China, his works were translated as early as the late 19th century, influencing revolutionary thinkers and scientists. In India, evolution was debated among Hindu scholars, some of whom found resonance with cyclical views of life and rebirth. In Islamic countries, acceptance has varied, but many scientists reconcile evolution with faith. In South America, Darwin's journey through Brazil, Argentina, and Chile is seen as foundational to regional natural history. Darwin belongs not to one nation, one language, or one culture, but to the entire human project of understanding ourselves and the world. Part 7. The Man Behind the Mind. Personality, Humor, and Humanity. Chapter 31. The Gentleman Scientist. When we think of Charles Darwin today, we often picture the serious old man with the long white beard. But the real Darwin was a man of warmth, wit, and quiet strength. He never held a formal academic position, never lectured at a university, and never earned a scientific degree yet. He became one of the most respected thinkers of all time. He was a gentleman scientist, working not in a university lab but in the study of his country home. That modest room, filled with books, fossils, and letters, was the engine of a revolution. Darwin approached science as a craft, not a performance. He believed in careful observation, honest reporting, and humble speculation. He wasn't drawn to dramatic declarations or flamboyant controversy. In fact, he disliked conflict and public speaking altogether. But behind that mild exterior was a relentless intellect tone that followed evidence wherever it led, no matter how uncomfortable. Chapter 32. His Sense of Humor. Despite the seriousness of his work, Darwin had a mischievous sense of humor. In his letters, he often made light of his own fame. When a clergyman claimed that Darwin's work made people behave like monkeys, Darwin responded dryly, "It is not that we descended from monkeys that shocks them, but that we share an ancestor with the bishop." He once wrote to a friend, "People say I am like a barnacle. I have spent so long studying them that we have become family." Indeed, he spent 8 years classifying barnacles. He joked about his own theory being a grand mess before it came together, and in another letter referred to the origin of species as my abominable volume. Darwin's lightheartedness was not a mask, it was part of his charm. He never took himself too seriously, even as the world took his ideas very seriously indeed. Chapter 33. The Family Man. Perhaps Darwin's most cherished role was that of husband and father. With Emma, he shared a loving and intellectually rich marriage. Though they differed in religious belief, Emma remained a devout Christian. While Charles drifted into agnosticism, they respected and supported each other deeply. They read aloud together, edited each other's writing, and raised their 10 children with patience and care. At Down House, Darwin was a playful father. He built kites with the children, played games on the lawn, and allowed them to use his laboratory for experiments. He once wrote that children are the most delightful of all companions. When their daughter Annie died at age 10, both parents were devastated. For Darwin, it was not only a personal loss, but a philosophical on deepening his doubts about divine purpose and increasing his empathy for all creatures that suffer and die. Darwin's journals are filled with notes about his children's behavior, not only as a loving father, but as a keen observer of development and emotion. Chapter 34. Darwin the Empath. Many are surprised to learn how deeply empathetic Darwin was toward animals. While he studied them dispassionately as part of nature, he also felt a deep kinship with them. He wrote movingly about dogs, horses, even insects, showing that animals had emotional lives not unlike humans. In The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, 1872, Darwin argued that animals feel fear, affection, grief, and joy. His sketches of how dogs wag their tails, how chimps show surprise, or how birds react to danger all pointed to one thing: we are not alone in our feelings. This idea, radical at the time, laid the groundwork for modern ethology and animal rights. Chapter 35. The Reluctant Icon. As his fame grew, Darwin became a reluctant icon. He received medals, honorary degrees, and endless requests for interviews and appearances, of which he declined. He disliked travel and hated speaking in public. He often avoided crowds and meetings, preferring quiet walks and letter writing. He was painfully aware that his theory had stirred controversy, yet he did not relish the role of a public figure. When friends urged him to speak out against critics, he refused. He said his work would stand or fall on its own merit. This modesty only increased his stature. Darwin became known not just as a brilliant scientist, but as a man of rare integrity. Chapter 36. The Symbol of Progress. By the end of his life, Darwin was more than a person, he was a symbol. To scientists, he represented the triumph of reason over superstition. To skeptics, he was a voice of quiet courage. To critics, he was a dangerous iconoclast. In artwork, he was depicted as the thinker holding the tree of life. In satire, he was caricatured as half man, half ape. In newspapers, he was praised and condemned in equal measure. Yet Darwin never demanded that people believe him. He simply asked them to look at the evidence, and in time the world did. Chapter 37. His Final Reflections. In his final years, Darwin continued to question, wonder, and reflect. He marveled at the complexity of nature and the mechanisms that drove it. He was especially fascinated by the interdependence of all life, how insects pollinate plants, how soil worms enrich the earth, how slight changes ripple through ecosystems. He once wrote, "There is grandeur in this view of life, that from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." These words, found at the end of The Origin of Species, serve as his lasting messageant, one of cold science, but of awe. Darwin did not remove the wonder from the world. He expanded it. He showed that nature's laws could be more elegant than miracle sand, that truth, even when uncomfortable, was worth pursuing. Part 8 to 50, Lessons from Darwin, Wisdom that Transcends Time. Chapter 38. Why Darwin Still Matters. Charles Darwin didn't merely offer a theory, he modeled a way of thinking. His legacy goes far beyond biology, branching into philosophy, psychology, education, and even leadership. In this chapter, we explore 50 enduring lessons drawn from Darwin's life and work lessons not only for scientists, but for all who seek truth in an uncertain world. 1. Lessons in observation and curiosity. Observe first, conclude later. Darwin spent decades collecting data before proposing his theory. Notice the ordinary. He saw profound meaning in earthworms, barnacles, and beetles. Ask simple questions. His greatest breakthroughs came from asking why finches had different beaks. Let nature surprise you. Evolution showed that reality is often stranger than myth. Keep a notebook. His field journals became the seeds of a global revolution. Wander with purpose. His walks on the sandwalk were not idle, they were meditations in motion. Be curious, not certain. Darwin revised his theories continuously in light of new evidence. 2. Lessons in thinking and analysis. Respect complexity. Nature doesn't offer easy answers, it offers layered ones. Think in systems. Darwin understood that no organism evolves in isolation. Value contradictions. Doubt is not weakness, it's the fuel of deeper inquiry. Beware assumptions. He challenged fixed species ideas, including his own early beliefs. Let go of ego. Darwin was willing to be proven wrong even publicly. Synthesize across discipline. He blended geology, botany, zoology, and psychology. Welcome good faith critique. He thrived on letters that challenged his thinking. Trois. Lessons in communication. Write clearly. The Origin of Species was written not for experts, but for educated laypeople. Use metaphor wisely. The tree of life remains one of science's most powerful images. Tell a story with your science. Darwin's writing combined data with narrative, a compelling mix. Edit with care. He rewrote key chapters more than 10 times before publishing. Speak with humility. He presented his theory not as dogma, but as a reasoned hypothesis. Let others speak for you. Darwin let Huxley and others defend his work in the public arena. 4. Leçons in character. Be patient. He waited over 20 years to publish his core theory. Live modestly. He never sought academic titles or royal honors. Avoid unnecessary conflict. Darwin declined to debate. His critics preferred data to drama. Stand by your work. Even when mocked, he stayed true to his research. Honor relationships. His marriage to Emma was built on respect, even amid philosophical differences. Care for the vulnerable. Darwin was anti-slavery, pro-education, and protective of the weak. Protect your peace. He withdrew from public life to protect his health and focus. Don't fear obscurity. Most of his life's work was done outside of institutions. OMG, RG, 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 IG. Lessons in Family and Humanity. Love is a steady force. His family was his anchor throughout life's storms. Let your children explore. Darwin nurtured curiosity in his kids with patience and humor. Grieve deeply, live fully. He mourned his daughter Annie, yet continued his life's work. Express emotion openly. Darwin wrote affectionately, mourned freely, and felt deeply. Laugh at yourself. He often joked about his barnacle obsession and monkey caricatures. VI. Lessons in Ethics and Impact. Speak for the voiceless. He extended empathy to animals long before it was popular. Connect all life. His work reminds us that humans are part of nature, not above it. Challenge injustice. Darwin despised cruelty, social, religious, or scientific. Respect belief, but follow truth. He honored Emma's faith even as he grew agnostic. Understand misuse. He was aware that his theories could be twisted and warned against it. 7. Lessons for the scientist. Start with evidence. Darwin's revolution began with a finch's beak. Test, refine, repeat. He ran dozens of plant experiments to verify tiny hypotheses. Let ideas mature. Some of his best work was the product of decades. Admit your limits. He acknowledged gaps in his theory and invited others to fill them. Learn from nature's design. Evolutionary mechanisms inspire modern algorithms and designs. Use your own backyard. Much of his groundbreaking work was done in his home garden. 8. Lessons for the future. Evolution is ongoing. We are not the end of the story, just one chapter. Life adapts. So must we. From climate change to pandemics, adaptation is survival. Science is a moral act. Seeking truth is a responsibility, not just a profession. Be kind to the doubters. Darwin was gentle even with those who opposed him. Let wonder guide you. Endless forms most beautiful. That was his vision of life. Keep asking why. The spirit of Darwin lives not in answers, but in questions. Part 9. Darwin's Enduring Revolution. A Conclusion. Chapter 39. From a Quiet Mind to a Global Shift. When Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, he could not have foreseen the full scope of the storm it would ignite, the evolution of thought it would inspire. What he unleashed was more than a scientific theory. It was a new lens through which humanity would forever view itself. He had begun his journey as a young man with a quiet disposition, an eye for detail, and a passion for beetles and fossils. But by the end of his life, he had become the architect of a paradigm shift that connected the past to the present, the simple to the complex, the human to the animal. Darwin's theory was not static. It evolved as new knowledge came to light. It invited collaboration, correction, and expansion, and perhaps most importantly, it invited humility. He showed us that science is not about being right, it's about seeking truth with clarity, courage, and compassion. Chapter 40, The Global Legacy. Today, Darwin's name graces research institutes and university halls, statues, and stamps. The annual Darwin Day on the 12th of February, the prestigious Darwin Medal, awarded by the Royal Society, the Darwin Awards, humorously highlighting human foolishness through natural selection. He has become part of popular culture, academic curriculum, ethical discussions, and even theological debate. His tree of life continues to grow not just in science, but in metaphor, art, and global consciousness. In the fight for truth over dogma, data over doctrine, and exploration over fear, Darwin remains a guiding star. Chapter 41. What Darwin would say today. If Darwin could see our world, know its discoveries, challenges, and contradictions, what might he say? He might marvel at our advances in genetics, artificial intelligence, and deep space exploration. He would likely be moved by how far we've come in understanding our origins. But he might also urge caution. He would warn against arrogance, the belief that humans are masters rather than stewards of Earth. He would worry about extinction rates, environmental collapse, and how quickly modern forces outpace our biological adaptations. Above all, Darwin would remind us, life is not guaranteed. It survives by adapting. It thrives through cooperation as much as competition, and it evolves whether we notice or not. Chapter 42, The Heart of the Matter. When all the facts are tallied, the fossils dusted, and the genes decoded, what remains? At the heart of Darwin's work is not just a theory, it's a philosophy of connection. Between species, between past and present, between science and soul, Darwin did not diminish life's beauty, he deepened it. He didn't replace God, he replaced superstition with the sublime. He taught us that even without supernatural design, the world is full of wonder, purpose, and breathtaking intricacy. He didn't remove our special place in the universe, he placed us within it, side by side with every other living being. Chapter 43, The Final Walk. Imagine Darwin's final walk on the sandwalk, the gravel path behind Down House, where he paced and pondered. The birds chirp, the wind rustles the hedges, insects crawl beneath the leaves. Each step he takes echoes the questions he spent a lifetime asking. Where did we come from? What connects us all? What makes life so endlessly variable and yet so deeply related? These were not easy questions, but Darwin faced them with courage, gentleness, and patience. His last step on that walk did not mark the end, it marked the beginning of a movement that continues to evolve today. Chapter 44, Darwin's Final Words. Charles Darwin died not as a man of wealth or war, but as a thinker surrounded by books, plants, family, and questions. His last words, whispered to Emma, were simple and loving. I am not the least afraid to die. And perhaps that is Darwin's final gift, a vision of life so vast, so interconnected, and so extraordinary that even death becomes part of a magnificent whole. Epilogue. A revolution that never ends. Darwin's revolution continues not through shouting, but through studying, not through certainty, but through curiosity. His name is carved into science not by force, but by evidence layer upon layer, species upon species, year upon year. We live in Darwin's world, whether we accept evolution or not. Every breath, every birth, every adaptation is a whisper of his theory at work. And as long as there are minds that wonder, questions that burn, and life that evolves work will never be finished. Part 10, Beyond the Beagle, Expanding Darwin's Influence Through Science and Time. Chapter 45, Darwin's Legacy in Modern Genetics. Charles Darwin didn't know about genes or DNA. When he proposed natural selection, he lacked a concrete mechanism to explain how traits were inherited. It wasn't until decades after his death that Gregor Mendel's work on heredity resurfaced and completely transformed Darwin's theory. Mendel's experiments with pea plants in the 1860s, ironically occurring at the same time Darwin was publishing Origin, showed how traits were passed from one generation to the next through discrete units, later named genes. At first, the scientific world ignored Mendel's work, but when it was rediscovered in 1900, it provided the missing puzzle piece for Darwinian evolution. The merging of Darwin's theory of natural selection with Mendelian genetics produced what we now call the modern synthesis, the foundation of all modern biology. In this synthesis, evolution could be described as a change in allele frequency within a population over time, driven by natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow. This was Darwin's dream made real, observable, testable, mathematical model for evolution. Today, evolutionary genetics allows us to track ancient human migrations using mitochondrial DNA, study genetic bottlenecks in endangered species, trace evolutionary trees using molecular clocks, understand hereditary diseases and their origins. Darwin's ideas, born from notebooks and natural observations, now live inside databases and DNA labs. Chapter 46, The Beagle Revisited. Darwin's voyage on the HMS Beagle remains one of the most iconic expeditions in history. But the Beagle was far more than a ship. It was a university at sea, a floating lab, a mobile classroom. Modern scientists and educators have retraced Darwin's journey. Many expeditions in the 20th and 21st centuries have visited the same ports: the cliffs of Patagonia, the jungles of Brazil, the highlands of the Andes, and, most importantly, the Galapagos Islands. In the Galapagos today, Darwin's name is everywhere. The Charles Darwin Research Station works to preserve the island's unique biodiversity. His finches, now known as Darwin's finches, remain a classic example of adaptive radiation. Ongoing studies of the finches have shown real-time evolution, confirming Darwin's theory with stunning precision. The Beagle's voyage continues not only in history books, but in the scientific missions it inspired. Chapter 47, Darwin's Impact on Anthropology and Human Evolution. Darwin approached the subject of human origins with great caution. In Origin, he wrote only a short and ambiguous sentence: "Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history." But in The Descent of Man, he made his views clear. Humans evolved through natural selection and sexual selection, just like all other animals. That assertion launched one of the most profound inquiries in science. Where did humans come from? Since Darwin's time, paleoanthropologists have uncovered a rich fossil record of hominins: Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy; Homo habilis; Homo erectus, Neanderthals; and, finally, Homo sapiens. DNA evidence has confirmed that modern humans share a common ancestor with chimpanzees about 6 to 7 million years ago. We are not descended from apes. We are apes, part of the great family of primates. The story of human evolution is still unfolding, but it rests on Darwin's foundation. He helped humanity understand that we are not a divine exception. We are a continuation of life's grand narrative. Chapter 48, Ecology and Evolution. Darwin's insights also laid the groundwork for ecology, the study of interactions between organisms and their environment. His observations of island ecosystems, predator-prey relationships, and mutualism all pointed to a deeply interconnected web of life. In modern terms, we now speak of coevolution, ecological niches, and evolutionary arms races concepts Darwin anticipated without the modern terminology. Today, evolutionary ecology helps explain why some species evolve to cooperate, mutualism, how parasites adapt to their hosts, why predator-prey dynamics often follow cyclical patterns, how invasive species disrupt ecosystems. Darwin's idea that species adapt not only to their environment, but to each other created a blueprint for systems thinking in biology. Life is not isolated, it's interactive, dynamic, and codependent. Chapter 49, Evolution and Human Behavior. Can Darwin's ideas help us understand human behavior, psychology, and culture? Many scientists say yes. The field of evolutionary psychology applies Darwinian principles to human minds. While controversial, it suggests that many of our trait sphere responses, mating preferences, even social norms may have evolved to increase survival and reproductive success. For example, our fear of snakes or spiders may be evolutionary holdovers. Our tendency to form tribes or communities may stem from social survival pressures. Our capacity for language, music, and storytelling may have offered adaptive advantages. Though Darwin didn't study psychology directly, he opened the door to treating human behavior as part of the natural world, not apart from it. Chapter 50, The Infinite Thread. In the end, Charles Darwin gave us more than a theory. He gave us a thread that runs through all biology, connecting every living thing to every other. From the first cyanobacteria to trilobites, to dinosaurs, to whales, bees, sequoias, penguins, and eventually to us, it's not a straight line, it's a tree, branching, diverging, adapting, and we are still climbing it. Part 11, Darwin and the Future, the Next Evolution. Chapter 51, Darwin and Artificial Intelligence. Darwin's theory of evolution wasn't just for living organisms, it became a metaphor and even a framework for how modern technologies evolve. Nowhere is this clearer than in the field of artificial intelligence, AI. In the late 20th century, researchers developed genetic algorithms inspired directly by natural selection. These programs evolved solutions to complex problems by mimicking biological processes. Variation through mutation, reproduction through combination, selection of the best performing solutions. AI learns by eliminating weaker models and promoting stronger ones, just as nature does with species. The same evolutionary logic is used in autonomous robots that adapt to new environments, language models that refine themselves based on feedback, optimization algorithms for logistics, finance, and engineering. Darwin's core idea that complex systems can emerge without conscious designness, now a foundational principle in how machines learn. Chapter 52, Darwin and Climate Change. Darwin may not have written about climate change, but his insights are vital to understanding how species will survive or fail to survive a rapidly changing planet. As global temperatures rise, species must either adapt, migrate, go extinct. Darwin's work helps ecologists model how fast organisms can evolve in response to climate pressures. Some species, like bacteria and insects, evolve rapidly. Others, like large mammals, are at greater risk. Current applications of Darwinian thinking include predicting shifts in disease vectors, like malaria-carrying mosquitoes, understanding how ocean acidification affects coral reef evolution, studying how crops can be genetically selected for drought resistance, The crisis of biodiversity loss, often called the sixth mass extinctionese, also seen through a Darwinian lens. Which species survive depends not just on strength, but on adaptability. Darwin didn't just give us a theory of the past, gave us tools to confront the future. Chapter 53, Darwin and Space. What does Darwin have to do with space exploration? A lot, it turns out. As scientists search for life on Mars, Europa, or exoplanets, they use Darwinian principles to hypothesize what life might look like beyond Earth. Questions like, how might alien organisms adapt to radiation or extreme cold? Would evolution still follow principles of natural selection? Could complex life evolve without DNA or water? NASA's astrobiology programs often cite Darwin in their approach to defining life and its possible origins. The underlying assumption, wherever life exists, it evolves. Moreover, the search for habitable planets revolves around finding stable environments where evolutionary processes can occur. Darwin's legacy now spans not just Earth, but the universe. Chapter 54, Evolution in the Digital Age. In a sense, human culture is evolving faster than biology. Digital memes, ideas, technologies, and social systems now mutate, reproduce, and spread in ways eerily similar to biological evolution. This process, often called mimetic evolutionists, shaped by variation. New ideas emerge daily. Selection. Popular ideas get shared and reinforced. Reproduction. Memes go viral and multiply across platforms. Just as genes are the units of biological heredity, memes are the units of cultural evolution. This concept, coined by Richard Dawkins, a staunch Darwinist, extends Darwin's model into the social realm. It means Darwinian thinking applies not only to life forms, but to politics, fashion, languages, religions, online behavior. The Internet has become a new ecosystemon where ideas evolve, compete, and sometimes go extinct. Chapter 55, The Moral Evolution. As societies evolve, su tudo moral valus. Darwin believed that moral instincts had evolutionary roots, that empathy, cooperation, and fairness could have conferred survival benefits in early human tribes. Today, evolutionary psychology explores why humans value justice and reciprocity, how altruism can evolve in selfish systems, why empathy is biologically advantageous. Understanding the evolution of morality doesn't undermine its value, it strengthens it. It suggests that compassion is not just a social construct, but an adaptation that helped build civilizations. Darwin's influence now touches law, ethics, and governance. Chapter 56, Teaching the Next Generation. More than 150 years after the origin of species, evolution remains misunderstood in some parts of the world. Teaching it effectively is not just about biology, it's about thinking critically. Darwin's work encourages students to ask questions without fear, value evidence over opinion, see the connections between all forms of life, approach uncertainty with curiosity, not panic. Some educators now use Darwin's life story to teach resilience, delayed gratification, and the importance of ethical inquiry. His personal struggles, illness, grief, rejection make him relatable to young minds. In classrooms around the globe, Darwin is still teaching. Chapter 57, A Theory Still Under Construction. Science is never finished. Darwin's theory, as foundational as it is, continues to evolve. Today, scientists explore evo-devo, evolutionary developmental biology, epigenetics, how environment affects gene expression, horizontal gene transfer in bacteria, the role of randomness in mutation and drift. None of these ideas negate Darwin's work. Instead, they expand it, proving that good science grows by questioning even its greatest minds. Darwin would have approved. He once wrote, "Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. A humble mind is a powerful one." Chapter 58, The Never-Ending Journey. Darwin's life was a voyage both literal and intellectual. He never stopped exploring, never claimed to have all the answers. He left us not with certainty, but with a map, a method of observing, questioning, and refining. We continue that voyage now. In labs and libraries, in forests and ocean depths, in classrooms and code, in hearts and minds open to wonder, his theory reshaped science, but his spirit reshaped how we seek truth. Part 12, The Final Evolution, Darwin's Humanity and Global Reverence. Chapter 59, The Personal Darwin, Gentle, Grounded, and Genuine. When we strip away the mythology, the caricatures, and the academic citations, what's left? A man, a husband who whispered kindness to his wife before death, a father who played games with his children and observed their growth with wonder, a scientist who walked alone, step by step, day after day, on a path behind his home. Darwin wasn't just the architect of an intellectual revolution, he was the embodiment of how revolutions should be built. Slowly, truthfully, humanely. He had flaws. He hesitated. He doubted himself. He got things wrong, but he never pretended otherwise. His strength wasn't in confidence, it was in conviction, grounded in humility. Chapter 60, Darwin Around the World. Though born in Shrewsbury, England, Darwin's influence has spread to every continent. In South America, where he walked the Andes and rode across the Pampas, his work is celebrated in museums and ecological preserves. In the Galapagos Islands, he is immortalized in research centers and conservation projects that still use his original notes. In Africa, the cradle of humankind, Darwin's name appears in anthropology, lectures, and fossil dig sites. In Asia, where genetics and evolutionary biology are thriving, his theories are embedded in new biotechnologies. In Europe, from university halls to national academies, Darwin is a scientific patron saint. Even in religious institutions, Darwin is sometimes respected as a man of moral integrityven by those who reject his conclusions. No matter where you go, Darwin is there not as a conqueror, but as a collaborator in our ongoing search for who we are. Chapter 61, Pilgrimages to Down House. Each year, thousands of people travel to Down House, Darwin's home in Kent, England. They walk the sand walk where Darwin paced in thought. They stand in his study where The Origin of Species was written. They see his garden experiments still preserved. They feel, somehow, closer to the origin not just of species, but of a scientific worldview. Down House is more than a museum. It's a living tribute to patience, gentleness, and the unending value of asking, why? Chapter 62, Tributes from the World's Greatest Minds. Over the years, some of the most brilliant thinkers and leaders have paid tribute to Darwin. Albert Einstein, a man of deep thought and great moral character. Stephen Jay Gould, Darwin's ideas remain the cornerstone of our understanding of life. Carl Sagan, his insight set humanity on the path to self-awareness. Barack Obama at the White House, Darwin is a symbol of our collective ability to question, to learn, and to progress. In disciplines far beyond biology ethics, politics, education, space, science, Darwin's name appears not just as a citation, but as a symbol of thoughtful evolution. Chapter 63, The Timeless Message. Darwin's writings are more than scientific observations. They are reflections on existence. His most famous passage still rings with power and poetry. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, that whilst this planet has gone cycling on, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and our being evolved. It's not just a conclusion, it's a blessing, a call to marvel, a call to respect the natural world and all its variations. Darwin didn't preach, he invited. He didn't demand belief, he shared evidence. He didn't condemn dissent, he encouraged exploration. That's why he endures not just as a mind, but as a model for every seeker of truth. Chapter 64, The Grand Design Without a Designer. Darwin's most radical idea was not that species evolved, it was that life's grandeur requires no grand designer, that natural processes given time, variation, and pressure could produce complexity, intelligence, morality, and even self-reflection. This concept is simultaneously humbling and uplifting. It says we are not fallen angels, not random mistakes, but products of nature refined by struggle, beauty, and survival. Darwin didn't remove magic from the world. He showed us a deeper magic, hidden in biology, geology, and time itself. Chapter 65, Where Darwin Leads Us. The path Darwin carved out continues into fields he never imagined. Neuroscience seeks the evolutionary roots of consciousness. Astrobiology applies his principles to alien life. Ethics uses Darwinian logic to question our treatment of other species. AI evolves with Darwinian code. Cultural theory models memes as genes of the mind. Everywhere we look in life, death, creativity, civilization, Darwin's lens still fits. And with every adaptation, we honor him. Part 13, Darwin's Echo, a final reflection on a world changed forever. Chapter 66, A World Awakened. Before Darwin, the world believed in permanent species fixed, unchanging, created in their final form. The earth was young, humanity was central, and purpose was divine. After Darwin, the world had to rethink everything. We began to understand that change is constant, that time is vast, that life is related, not separate, that nature is not cruel, is impartial, wondrous, and dynamic. Darwin turned the world's gaze from heaven to earth and found meaning not in miracles, but in mechanisms. And somehow the world became more beautiful. Chapter 67, The Great Chain Becomes a Tree. The old idea of the great chain of being placed humans at the top, animals below, plants beneath that, and rocks at the bottom, an inflexible hierarchy. Darwin shattered that chain. He replaced it with a tree knot, a ladder of superiority, but a web of branching connections. Bacteria to birds, fish to foxes, humans to everything that came before. We are not above the tree. We are a twig on one of its many branches. This change in perspective has redefined how we see animals, ecosystems, and even ourselves. We now know that harming other species harms our own future, that interdependence is the law of life. Chapter 68, Darwin and the Sacred. To some, Darwin was a threat to religion, but to others, he deepened their sense of the sacred not through Scripture, but through science. The awe once reserved for creation now expands to DNA spirals billions of years in the making, fossils whispering forgotten chapters of life, butterflies that evolved from dinosaurs, stars whose dust lives in our blood. Darwin never claimed to destroy faith. He simply offered a new way to feel wonder by seeing nature as artist, sculptor, and poet of its own story. Chapter 69, The Revolution That Asked No One's Permission. Unlike political revolutions, Darwin's had no speeches, no protests, no flags. It didn't demand power. It didn't seek loyalty. It only asked, what is true? And when the evidence was strong enough, it simply changed the world. This kind of quiet, revolutioned by evidence, not egois rare and precious. It shows that you can change history not by shouting, but by observing carefully and speaking honestly. In a world of noise, Darwin's example is a soft but enduring voice. Chapter 70, A Final Reflection. Charles Darwin died in 1882, his body buried in Westminster Abbey. But his mind never stopped traveling. It traveled in the genes of finches and frogs, in the fingers of surgeons, in the algorithms of engineers, in the prayers of theologians grappling with truth. It traveled in textbooks, classrooms, and across continents. It traveled in every question that began with, "How did this come to be?" It travels still. In the final analysis, Darwin's greatest contribution was not evolution itself, but the courage to follow truth wherever it leads, even into discomfort, even against tradition. Epilogue: The Endless Evolution. This is not the end. Darwin's story is not just history, it is an open invitation. Every day, new scientists take up the mantle he laid down. Every discovery, every theory, every challenge adds a new branch to the tree he helped reveal. And so we continue. Exploring, wondering, evolving, because life, as Darwin taught us, is not fixed. It is always becoming. There is grandeur in this view of Darwin, a man of the earth, a man of evidence, a man of deep humanity. He changed the way we see life not by conquering it, but by understanding it. And that understanding will never stop growing.